Bill William Schock, Falls City, Nebraska, on behalf of Martin Luther Lutheran Church for our Veterans program today. We're going to ask Bill some questions, and instead of having Bill be our speaker for today, we're going to show this video. So I hope you enjoy it. And right now, everybody in the United States should thank our veterans. And today we're thanking you guys plus Bill Schock. Thank you very much. Here is our questions for Bill.
Okay.
Okay, Bill.
Hey, you're pretty good.
Tell us, when did you join the service?
I joined the service on February the 9th of 1942. 1942.
What branch of service?
I was in the infantry. I was among the first branch of selectees, or draft, you know. Some of my friends were going, so I just joined them. My number was a little higher, but there wasn't any future. Everybody was going to have to serve anyway, so that's what I did.
So, did you fly a plane?
Right when Pearl Harbor was attacked, I'd already been in 10 months, and they took us on the 35th Division on troop train out to the West Coast, and we spent Christmas Day on the coast. They thought the Japanese were going to maybe have an invasion. So then I transferred to, a couple of months later, I transferred to the Aviation Cadets. And I went, it was about an 11th month training thing, pilot training on the West Coast. And after I got my wings and my commission, I went to Boise, Idaho and joined a B-17 crew as a co-pilot. And we trained out there for a couple months, and then we picked up a new B-17 at Grand Island, and we flew to Bangor, Maine, and then we flew across the North Atlantic to join the 8th Air Force in England. And I was with them. I started my combat flying on October the 8th of 1943. And our first raid was to Bremen. We bombed, my first raid was to Bremen. We bombed the shipping in their harbor. And we lost 30 B-17s through flak and through fighter planes. So we got back safely, but the next day then we were assigned to fly to a place called Anklam, which is about 90 miles northeast of Berlin. And we hit a fighter base there, a fighter factory, and on the way home, we were attacked by what General Bob Travis said were 500 Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt fighter planes. And we were under constant attack for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And when we got back to our base, there were a number of strategic holes in our bomber, and it never flew again. So we lost, as I say, we lost 30 more planes. And the next day, for the third day in a row, we were called in to go on another mission to Munster, Germany, to bomb what they call a marshalling yards, which is a great big, like North Platte out here for railroads. And we got hit over the target, and we had to make an emergency landing at our fighter base right off the coast. And so that was, and we lost another 30 airplanes. And then we were what they call stood down, because we've been on 3 straight missions. We were stood down for 2 days. And while we were coming back from a pass in London, the 8th Air Force bombed Schweinfurt. And it was one of the worst raids of the war. About 250 airplanes went for the B-17s, and 68 of them were shot down. So the first week I was operational, we lost 150 B-17s with 10 men to a crew. That was the end of the bombing for a couple, 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And you want me to continue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
we went on a number of missions deep into Germany, and on March the 9th of 44, we bombed the 8th Air Force. It was the second raid over Berlin, and we made it. We were under constant fighter attacks and threw flak on that, but we got back to the base. And when we got back to the base, the guy who was a pilot for had wound up his 25 missions, so I took over the crew. And on Easter Sunday of April the 9th of 1944, we were bombing Marienburg, East Prussia. And I must tell you that we flew on those missions. We flew from 20,000 to 25,000 feet. And outside the airplane, the temperature's around 40 to 50 degrees below zero. Well, we ran through a lot of flak on the target, dropped our bombs, and what the 8th Air Force said was one of the best bomb drops of the entire war. And on the way back, it was one of the longest missions of the war. It was briefed for about 12 hours. And on the way back, we were briefed when we were opposite Sweden, if we were about out of gas, that we should leave the formation and go into Sweden, fly into Sweden, and we would be interned there. But about 3 or 4 minutes after we'd make the decision, the co-pilot and I, to make the decision to keep going on, we were flying in a group of around 15 B-17s. And as I say, about 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes, all of a sudden the plane was raised in the air about 50 feet, unless it seemed we'd been hit by ground fire, which we called flak. And it raked the east side of the airplane and wound up in the gas tanks, and there started a heck of a fire. And I knew that I'd been on enough of them myself. When there's a fire in a gas tank, you usually have an explosion. So I rang the alarm bell, and which was the signal for everybody to bail out. And then I bailed out, and then the plane circled us about once and then blew up. And it was right over Denmark, and all of us got out of the airplane. But the engineer, top gunner, was hit by gunfire in his parachute on the way down, and he was killed. And the ball turret gunner was hit so badly he lost an arm. And one of the waist gunners and the tail gunner were hit so badly they were hospitalized in Germany until almost the end of the war. And then they were in and out of Veterans Administration hospitals the rest of their life, which unfortunately was very short for both of them. We were taken prisoner right away. We were very lucky because lots of crews, when they had to bail out, if they were captured by civilians, they were hanged or collared or pitchforked or killed. And I suppose it would be the same situation over here if you bombed their city or bombed a place and killed a bunch of people. Naturally, they would be upset. Well, we went to interrogation right outside of Frankfurt. And that was about 3 days of veiled threats and whatnot. And then they put us on about 20 of us in a little old boxcar. And we were about 3 days going about 200 miles on the railroad till we landed in Barth, till we wound up in Barth, Germany, which is right on the Baltic Sea. And that was our prison camp. It was named Stalag Luft 1. And during the war, it was only for British and American airmen who had been shot down. And there were 9,000 of us in that camp. There were 3 compounds, 3,000 in each compound. And so I spent 13 months in that prisoner of war camp. Now I want to tell you that we were not mistreated physically because the Germans went by the Geneva Convention, which we did with their prisoners that came over here. But there was mental anguish. I'll tell you, a lot of it. And it was the cold. We lived in our barracks is what they call a block, and there were 15 rooms in it. It wasn't very long, 15 rooms, and there were 12 men to a room, about the size of this, where they could get 6 bunk beds around the room, and 12 of us from all over the United States were in that room. So we existed in there for all that time. And it was one of the coldest winters in Germany, because that was the year of the Battle of the Bulge. And we didn't have any water, or we didn't have any heat, or we didn't have sanitary facilities in our block. So during the winter time, they would lock us in about 3:30 in the afternoon and begin getting dark. And we were in there all night then in our shacks. When there was not an air raid in the area, we were able to be outside walking around and do what's that. But when there was an air raid in force, well, they locked us up for however long it was, you know. And so, what could I tell you about there? Well, how did we get our news? Did you know what was going on? Well, at kind of the German headquarters, they had a radio, but it was, of course, in German. But we had people prisoners of war who knew German, and they would translate us, so we would know what the German radio had to say. And besides that, there was a secret radio in our camp, in our compound, and I guess maybe in the other ones too. I don't know how it came from. Nobody ever was determined, and the Germans searched for it. But they would get news from the BBC in London. And they would come around about once a week in our block and come into our room, a couple guys, and they would tell us what was happening in the war. And we couldn't talk about it from then on. It had to be secret, because if it got out that anybody was talking about what we've been told, then we were denied that privilege. So we kept that pretty close. And we were fed by the Germans, but we had a cook shack, and it was manned by British prisoners of war, and we got mostly barley soup, and we had there was a lot of barley soup and turnips and things like that. And then every now and then we would get what we call Red Cross parcels through the Red Cross, about 1 to 3 men, and they would have things in them like old cigarettes and Spam, and maybe some jam or some liver paste, and maybe things like that. And that's what really kept us going, because the food was, and of course the Germans, I don't think were probably eating that well either, but I'm not going to give them much. But anyway, it was pretty tough going when we didn't have the Red Cross boxes. Mm-hmm. And toward the end of the war, we had roll call twice a day, and people were passing out roll call, lack of food, malnutrition.
Okay, Bill, tell us about your book.
Well, I wrote a lot of the book. I kept a little notebook I made from Red Cross supplies while I was in prison camp, and I kept it concealed in our mattress. Our mattress consisted of a gunny sack with some straw and wood shavings. And I concealed it in there because once in a while, well, not once in a while, but quite often the German guards would come around and they'd tear everything up, and so I concealed it in there and I got by with it okay. And then when I was on terminal leave down in San Antone, I wrote about the combat in it. In the 1st of May of 1945, when the war was drawing to a close, we were aware of it, and the Russians were approaching us from the east. And one night then, we woke up in the morning and all the guards were gone. They were gone because the Russians were right outside. So the Russians came in to our camp. First of all, they were on horseback. And they were pretty wild men. But then the regular troops came in, and they were with us for about a week before we finally were evacuated to Reims, France, and then to a port in France called Lucky Strike, where all the prisoners were assembled. And we were there, I don't know, a couple of weeks, I think. And when we were evacuated, they flew in bombers to evacuate us, and they evacuated us to Reims. And the quartermaster corps there had all the food, and we had fried chicken, and we had white bread. And to all of us, that white bread tasted just like angel food cake. It was so delicious. Some wanted to go back to their bases in England, but I'd had enough of that, and I wanted to come home. So I was assigned to a Liberty ship at Le Havre, which had really been beat up in the war. And so I came home on a Liberty ship. There were about 200 men down in the bottom of the thing, and that was just terrible. 200 enlisted prisoners of war, and it was terrible for them, I know. And there were only about 8 of us officers up in one room on the top. But anyway, it was a 2-week voyage that I'll never forget. So I came home. We were briefed on the East Coast, and finally I got out to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I came up. Is it my phone? And I came up from Fort Leavenworth on a train. And when I got out the depot in Falls City, there was only one woman there, and I asked her for a ride uptown. And on the way uptown, I saw my mother's car at Bullock's Grocery. So I got out of the car and went in, and my mother was there shopping, and she didn't see me, and I came up behind her and said, "Hi, Mom, I'm home." And she bought a couple steaks, so at least finally I had a steak dinner. So that was the end of my military.
Good. What was your rank?
Oh, I finally got to be a captain on terminal leave, but that didn't amount to anything because I was prisoner of war over a year, and they had to promote me 1 grade, so they promoted me to captain, but I really didn't serve as a captain. But hey, I am officially a captain.
Okay. Could you have us see your jacket?
Yeah. I was a little smaller than this.
Tell us about that. You want to say something about the wings?
That's my squadron insignia.
Oh, that's what.
546 Squadron of the 384th Bomb Group. This is the Distinguished Flying Cross, and this is the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, which means 4 air medals. And this is a unit citation for one of the missions we were on. And this is the 8th Air Force patch, of course. There's my wings. And this is a prisoner of war dog tags. And I have 2 more medals that are on there. I have a bronze star, and I have a prisoner of war medal. They came a little later.
Who's this guy?
Oh, that's the joker you're talking to. This is my wife, Dorothy, who passed away 6 years ago. We were married 62 years.
Tell us about the plane. What kind is it?
This is a B-17 called a Flying Fortress. And it had a 10-man crew. And we flew our missions, well, I told you that, between 20 and 25,000 feet. And this is a ball turret. This man under there, he was the one that lost an arm. And the man in the top turret was the one that was killed in his parachute. And the ones that were wounded severely was one of the waist gunners, the ball turret man, of course, and the tail gunner.
And you were located right there?
Yeah, this is a co-pilot on this side and the pilot on this side. bombardier, and navigator. In the 8th Air Force, 34,000 men were killed, and many more than that were taken prisoners of war. And it was in the World War II, it was one single unit, Marines included, that lost the most men. And those are not my records. They're official records.
Okay, we want to thank Bill for our speech today. This is April 27th, 2014, in his home at Falls City, Nebraska. I think we should applaud him for the services of serving the United States of America. Thank you.
Yeah.